Wow, that's amazing because it seems that finally, with the new software, it's possible to have our talk and you can see how beautiful I am and basically uh, I want to, but I still am stupid because I need. Okay, level 4. Buongiorno, good evening, whatever it is the time you have. Level 4 is devoted to such an important element of the context, which is social norms and culture. All of us are deeply involved and affected by the social norms that we live, the rules that basically are the same for our peer group. And the peer group affects our individual decision as well. So let's go with basically the same metaphor that you already have listened so many times, developed by Daniel Kahneman in Thinking Fast and Slow, which is the system one, system two metaphor. I mean, and this is important to enlighten. That is nothing to do with the real physiology of the brain. I mean, the brain is not divided in system one and system two. It's a helpful metaphor in order to describe how people make decisions in a context very complex and highly uncertain. So again, the metaphor says that the most ancient part of our brain, which is actually the one associated to the limbic system, and that basically processes our feelings and emotion, is in charge of all that automatic, instinctive, and emotional decisions that most of the time do not really produce an awareness. And we use the adjective irrational for most of these decisions. So all the automatic decisions are related to system one, while system two is related to abstract thinking, strategic planning, planification, and basically the rational way of deciding. And I'm using the adjective again as the traditional connotation that is given to the word rationality. And this peculiar level is very, very relevant for the use we make of words. So, what's the point? And what's the role played by social norms? That indeed, in terms of evolutionary biology, we are animals that have evolved over thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, again balancing our life between go signal and stop signal. And system one again refers to the situation that in ancient times you may live when you basically are facing a lion. And what's the reaction, the decision you make once you see the lion? Basically, what happens in terms of survival instinct is that you play an executable file. You see a lion, you run, which of course applies also to situations in which nowadays, if we see someone, a group of people running against us and escaping from something, the instinctive decision is to run as well. And this comes from the evolutionary biology of our brains. There is a part of our decision, maybe most related to imitating others, that is really, really driven by this instinct of surviving, which means that in that peculiar situations, we not necessarily apply abstract thinking, but we execute. And when we execute, not necessarily we do the right thing. So social norms in terms of imitation of behavior comes from this very, very ancient evolution of things. And I mean, there are many um, experiments that show how we are imitating animals. Let's see
Would you rather
the
stand
Ashline
alone
study.
and be right, or follow the group and be wrong? The answer might seem obvious, but the truth just may surprise you.
The rules of this game are simple. Over here, we've drawn a line. And over here, we've drawn 3 lines,
The
A,
experiment is pretty
B,
simple.
and C. Only one of these 3 lines is an exact match for the first line. Can you figure out which one it is? Got it? Did you say B? Simple enough, right?
Yeah.
Or is it? Try one more round with a different version that we're showing our volunteers.
You've got to decide which one of these 3 straight lines is the same length as this first card.
So, where do you stand on this one? A, B, or C? Before you decide, take a look at what our volunteers picked.
What's your choice?
It's A.
You think it's A?
I think so.
Okay, go to A. A. A.
It's A.
Definitely A.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going with A.
Okay.
The answer seems obvious, right? Or is it? Take one last look. Are you going with these people who all picked A? Or did you choose to go with B or C? Time's up. Got your pick?
It's A.
You're gonna go with the group.
Yeah.
All right. Great.
Is that what you picked? Or did you go with another answer? It turns out the answer to this round is C. And while you likely chose C first and stuck with your answer, we also know that some viewers might have felt the peer pressure and switched to A.
It's A.
I want to ask you something. Did your gut at first tell you that the answer was actually C?
Yeah, but everyone was choosing A, so I just felt like I had to pick A too.
You felt the pull of the crowd.
Yeah.
In case you haven't figured it out yet, we'll let you in on a little secret. The first 9 people in this line were working for us, and each time we ran the experiment, they were instructed to pick the same wrong answer.
A.
A.
It's A.
Seeing all these people choose A left the last person in line who wasn't in on it with a tough decision: to go with their gut or with a group.
You're gonna go with the group.
Yeah.
Although not all of the test subjects at the end of the line fell for it.
I think it's C.
In spite of what everybody else thinks. You don't trust the wisdom of the crowd?
I'm trusting my gut.
Okay.
To be perfectly honest, I think C looks closest.
And you think that they're all wrong?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, guys.
And don't beat yourself up if you were tempted to go along with the crowd.
Make your choice.
I'm gonna have to go with A.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. What happened?
I have a confession.
Okay.
I actually thought it was C. So
Did you start to question your own judgment?
I did. I don't want to be the dumb kid. I don't want to stand out. You know, I was like, A.
Have you ever ignored the truth to fit in with a group? Just think, what if those weren't lines, but evidence in a murder case? Would you be able to see past the group consensus and just go with your gut?
Studies show that when someone holds a different opinion than the rest of the group, the anterior cingulate cortex, also known as the oops area of the brain, produces an error signal. We try to fix that by modifying our opinion to be in line with the group, even if it's a viewpoint we're uncomfortable with or know is wrong. And that's because there are some major evolutionary advantages for those who follow along with the group, namely survival. If you want to stay safe, stay with the herd.
Well, I mean, of course, this is a kind of made up, very, very fancy and very well dressed experiment for the TV show. The reality is much more complex, and when we will deal in the level of ethics to how experiments are run, we will actually get back on the ash line experiments, because these are pretty old experiments and there is not such a universal consensus on their reliability. But still, I think the most important point here is that the social context plays a role in terms of pressure on how we perceive what is going on in the information context that is relevant for our decision. So let me try to get back to the presentation and just giving real example. So this is exactly the same reason why when we, for example, we are in a place with our significant other to visit a city, a country we don't know, and the time approach to eat, and we need to choose and pick up a place where to eat. Well, of course, we can go on TripAdvisor, but that again is affected, and we will get back on that in a minute by social pressure. But still, sometimes you pick up randomly a place according to some elements of the information context. And what happens typically is that social norms is that if you see a place crowded, you tend to consider that restaurant reliable. I mean, the information we get is that, okay, everybody goes there, it has to be good. And if we see a place empty, we deduce that that place is not so good. But imagine there is an information cascade according to which the first couple arrives and the two places are empty as well and pick up randomly one place. The second couple arrives and it sees one place with one couple sitting and the other place empty and goes where the couple is sitting. Two couples now are there. And again, informational cascade. The third couple arrives, the third family, third group, and sits where the two others are there, and so on and so forth, till we get to the point in which one restaurant is completely crowded and the other is completely empty, independently of the quality of the food served, but just by a random initial decision. If we think about the logic of sharing a post on social networks sometimes, it is not that different from what I'm describing here in terms of information cascade. And if we want to give a real up-to-date example of social norms, think about yourself 1 year ago, nobody was dressing a mask, even in places, crowded places in big cities, where mask should be kind of a very respectful way of maintaining like an healthy environment in terms of the air we breathe. And that's the reason why, in terms of social norms, if you go to Eastern countries like Japan, Thailand, people there dress mask even before COVID-19. But now everybody does, everybody dresses the mask, and so we do as well. It comes to be highly easy to adapt to a new social norm imposed by an exogenous event or shock. Let's get back on TripAdvisor. I mean, the problem of social pressure and peer pressure is there even in the digital platforms. If you use BlaBlaCar, you know that the system of ratings is very important in order to understand if the driver you are picking up has good ratings for people. I mean, it's important in terms of safety, of the well-being you will experience during the travel, and so on and so forth, the reliability of times, and so on and so forth. The problem with digital platform using a system of reviews, and that applies even for TripAdvisor when we go to a restaurant, is that there is a tendency to over-report. So what you will observe typically, this is an highly selected sample in which people typically rate a big evaluation. Why? Because they are in a sense of mutual obligation between each other, and that applies to BlaBlaCar but also to Airbnb. I mean, and this is a problem in the digital platform, very well known. I mean, there is actually tendency to over-report the level of satisfaction, which means that in the end, the reliability of these reviews is not so clear from scratch. And if it's not so clear, although it's very important information, we need to take care of that problem. And this is really something at stake when thinking about system of reviews in digital platform. I mean, people normally, that's the reason why they go immediately for the kind of extreme reviews in order to understand what is going on. But there is a problem of selection of sample, and there is a problem even there of imitating what the others are doing. A system of mutual obligation that of course puts question on the reliability of this information. And this again is social norms and pressure. But getting back to a level that we already had discussed before, if you think about mental anchors, of course, the system of reviews play a role because this comes out to be an anchor for our judgment, a random anchor indeed, that comes into our information set and somehow alters our perception of what we want to know. That is highly uncertain at the beginning. So let's go a little bit into the description of norms and how norms may work. Starting from descriptive norms. So norms may be a different type, prescriptive or descriptive. Prescriptive means that basically the norm intends to show what should be the ideal behavior. And I mean, that's the logic of prescription. But experiments show that most of the time what is really effective in influencing our behavior is descriptive norms, which means that starts from data and empirical evidence. I mean, the example that is always quoted comes from the use of towels in the hotels. Since a few years ago, of course, in terms of consumption of towels and water associated to cleaning up everything, it would be better to reuse your towel for a certain number of days you stay in the hotel. But typically, people throw out the towels in order that to be changed. And then there are many studies, and for people reading the books by Robert Cialdini, he is a master of descriptive norms. Typically the effective message there is this sort of card in which you read that 75% of people who stay at this hotel reuse their towel at least once during their stay. This is a descriptive norm starting from data, which puts the person in the mood of identifying with the majority of people, and that may produce an influence on imitative behavior. The descriptive norm is different from the prescriptive norm that simply would state you are kindly asked to reuse your towel, but with no reference to what happens in the crowd. And there are experiments run by the Behavioral Insight team showing that descriptive norm may be very effective when dealing with collecting taxes. So, there has been an experiment. I will try to put the paper on our share Padlet that tested different ways of sending information to the taxpayers in UK, and the descriptive norm in which you get the information that 9 out of 10 people in UK pay their tax on time may be a good incentive in order to pay on time as well, because you feel the pressure. That is the aim of this sort of messages. Does it work? Keep in mind that experiments work on the margin, which means that there are behavioral incentives that produce significant numbers on average. You are not going to see everybody falling into the message or following the message. You will observe that on aggregate, these sort of messages are more effective, that's the logic, then prescriptive norms that just state you are supposed to pay tax on time. I already made maybe the example of the smart bill that works on social pressure. And now even utilities in Italy and Eni as well use this sort of informational message. There is a nice TED talk from the founder of O-Power, the first old startup that launched the smart bill. Typically, when we receive the energy bill, we are we pay a lot of attention to the price, but not much more. There is pages that we don't even have the skills to read and interpret. Very easy visual stimulus. If I am compare, if this is myself and this is my consumption, and I am putting comparison with my efficient neighbors and all neighbors with the same energy power, I can immediately get the information in relative comparison of how much I am efficient, and I can reinforce the stimulus to through the use of emoticons like this one that shows, okay, good, you're doing well. If this is the case and I'm catching the attention of the payer, then I can add on that tips in order to augment energy efficiency. And there are very nice studies showing that as long as you receive a smart bill, your behavior is starting to change according to that stimulus. Then it fades away when we basically forget that you have received the bill, and it comes back 3 months after with the next bill. And again, another tip, experiments show that after 4 bills, some of the marginal changes in behaviors you had become persistent, which means you get to be more energy efficient. And you may be interested to answer the question, why should an energy provider be interested in people being energy efficient? Indeed, one of the main issues of the energy provider is not actually to consume more, but to stay loyal to the client. So the churn rate is a big issue in Eni as well, Eni Gas e Luce, which means that you are more interested in providing a service with a great experience, and this is part of a great experience for a customer. Together with the two good colleagues, Mattia Nardotto from University of Berlin, Tommaso Reggiani, University of Cardiff. We basically wanted to run a randomized control trials using the sample of small companies in the province of Varese in Lombardy, north of Italy, thanks to the availability of information provided by Confartigianato Imprese. Confartigianato is the Federation of Artisans and Craftsmen. It's very powerful in Italy because it's an association, is an association of small entrepreneurs that put together their strengths in order to influence policy at the national level. So we wanted to basically replicate the logic of the smart bill for the clients of Confartigianato that basically pay Confartigianato, the association, for managing the payroll schemes, communication. There are some services provided by the association, and we wanted to use the same logic. So we basically send a new bill to the clients of Confartigianato showing how much on time the company was in paying its bill with respect to other companies of Confartigianato. And actually the experiment, we are still in the phase of working paper, shows that on aggregate, the fact of receiving the stimulus reduces the number of days of delay with which you pay a bill, which produces not really an amount of money, because actually the company of Confartigianato were not insolvent. They just were paying with some delay, but betters off the cash flow and the liquidity of the company, because it produces money on time, right on time, to be spent for many issues. So we talked about the role play by descriptive norms, but what is the relationship between social norms and culture and the market? Because indeed we live in a continuum in which all the time and all the day we have transactions that require spending money, but we live also in the social world where there are social norms applying for that context. So imagine that this is an example I always make to students. Of course, in present that should be easy, but think about yourself. I don't know. You wanna ever go with a girl, a guy, and basically let's make the example from the perspective of an heterosexual man wanting to have a try with a girl. So this guy invites the girl for an appointment, and then they go together out, they have dinner together, and the guy pays for everybody, for the couple. Then they go to watch a movie, and the guy pays for the movie as well for the girl. Then they go to have a drink, and the guy pays. So the guy pays for all the experience, and then he picks up the girl in front of her door. I mean, at my times, I'm an old guy. That was the moment of the ride. I mean, sorry about the military wars, which means you try to kiss the girl. Of course, if you have the sensation that it works. But imagine that in front of the door, you just add a piece of information and you say, I spent 50 euros this evening. Okay? So what's the point here? The point is that if you think about this situation, and of course this guy is going to be fucked off because it's incredibly rude, the use of this sort of information. But thinking about the context, that is not information that is not really known by the two parts. Because actually, I mean, the girl is there and basically knows more or less by estimate what amount of money has been spent. But the fact of putting it out, of course, breaks the social norms. I mean, in this kind of context, money does not never enter the equation. I mean, this is actually the social behavior that typically does not apply. And this is the mixing of social norms and market that we need to deal with. So if I'm inviting you for dinner, that would be really great at some point to have the opportunity of doing that. And you come with $30 or 20 euros and you ask me, go and buy yourself the best wine you can with the money. I mean, this is really good money to buy a bottle of wine, but it's incredibly rude in terms of social norm. I'm probably going to piss off because typically you go with a bottle, you present yourself with a bottle that typically is going to cost much less than that. But I mean, this is my approach. I get the lowest price bottle. No, I'm joking. But still, the point is, money not always is the relevant issue in a relationship, and it is something to keep in mind as long as we analyze behaviors of people. So in some situation, adding money to the equation makes things much worse, and this is the point of mixing social norms and market norms. When thinking about the video game and situation about the job, that of course may be an issue as well. So we live in a continuum between market norms and social norms, which means that we need to understand which is the time and the occasion in which it's good to talk about money and to put money on the table, and which are the occasions in which this is not really the case. And I mean, it's a mixed situation. It's something to keep in mind. So if we want to ask ourselves how do financial incentives work in their life, we would basically end up with a curve that is that would look like something like that. So imagine I'm putting on the y-axis my willingness to work. So imagine that you're gonna pay someone for a task. So let's imagine you move to Milan and you move to a new flat and you want someone to help you in making the moving. And typically you may ask a friend. And then what's the point? I mean, imagine that the friends helps you in moving the furniture, putting the books in the boxes and in the shelves. And after a long day of work, you are done and you're gonna pay your friend with, I don't know, $3, €5, or whatever. I mean, if you think about the willingness to work, so the reaction of your friend most probably will be that that friend is going to be pissed off. Why are you insulting me? Pay me €5, $3, whatever is the currency. Because indeed, social norms here imply that money is not entering the table, but it's very different if at the end of the same day you offer your friend a beer, which maybe has the value of €5, but is not directly related to money. Of course, the willingness to work is going to be high if it's clear that it's going to be free, because you are working on the intrinsic motivation of your friend. And of course, after the collapsing of the willingness to work, I mean, your satisfaction if you are paid so much less, that willingness to work is increasing linearly when you increase money at stake. I mean, even for a friend, if you pay a huge amount of money, that goes more and more towards a market relationship. And of course, the attitude of the person changes according to the monetary incentive. But the problem is that there is this mixing area in which it's not so clear what is the best way of dealing with the context. So what about gift? So gifts are in the social domain. And that's the reason why, traditionally, the social norms is never mention the price. Have you ever thought when you receive a book, and basically now it's very easy to know the cost of the book, the price of the book, but we put a force in cancelling out the price of the book, because that is the social norms associated to gift. Gifts are not supposed to include money. Well, I mean, it has to be clarified that sometimes social norms dictate when money is an appropriate gift. There are some cultures and some places, and it applies also in some regions or provinces of Italy in the south, where, for example, thinking about a wedding, money is an accepted gift instead of a physical gift. So money there enter as a accepted way of dealing with that relationship, that context. But you may understand that is not always the case. So there is a nice paper I will share. It's very famous. It's an old paper by an economist from Harvard, Joel Waldfogel, that is called the Dead Weight Loss of Christmas. I think you had the opportunity of reading about it also in the course of economics in the core manual. I mean, this is a paper made with an experiment with students, and the hypothesis is that if you think about Christmas, which is a typical moment of the year in which we exchange gifts between each other, in terms of efficiency, Christmas is not at all efficient. Because, I mean, the hypothesis is that when you make gift, the best you can achieve is that you perfectly match preferences of the person that received the gift. But that's the first best. Out of that, what happens is that sometimes people that receive gift do not really like what they receive. And I mean, the less close is the person that gives you a present. I mean, think about colleagues that sometimes exchange between each other's very small gift and you don't really like it. And what happens is that, and there are some studies showing that just after Christmas, people exchange on eBay, put on auction on eBay, very bad ties or food that they are not never going to eat or something like that. So what is the dead weight loss of Christmas? That if you give people money, the relative amount of money to the person, that is a much more efficient gift because the person is going to use that money to buy what he or she likes. But of course, what's the point? Christmas and gift are in the social domain, and the social domain refers to intrinsic motivation. The social value of the gift is important. And I mean, always be careful in mixing social norms and market norms. Now there are more and more digital tools in order to make presents that more and more go towards the efficiency. I mean, think about the smart box. In the smart box, you have a collection of places, so you may be 100% sure that you're gonna find something that the person that received the smart box likes. But most of the time, in terms of social domain, the smart box looks like a very not thought present. You don't put so much effort in in buying a smart box or a coupon or something like that. So a coupon is very efficient. They think about coupon in Amazon, but of course is less valuable in terms of social value. So if we wanna roughly plot the relationship between the social value of a gift and inefficiency, we will observe that inefficiency goes up and up as long as you increase the social value. So in terms of gift, physical gift instead of money are inefficient but highly valuable from a social standpoint, and the other way around for money. Low social value, big efficiency. So let's go back to job, to the concepts of work, and that may be helpful for your video game because even there may be situations like that. So imagine that your employer asks you if you prefer a $1,000 bonus or a week of vacation in Paris, and then ask you to come late at the office and to work in the weekend. So most of the people are going to answer for the $1,000. But what about if he gave you as a gift 1 week of vacation without asking? That, of course, creates a sort of social relationship between the employer and the employees, an attachment to the company and between each other. And that maybe produces a higher motivation to work for the company because you feel the employer as a friend. I mean, gift in the workplace move relationship from the market transaction toward the social domain and build social capital. Social relationships create a greater sense of reciprocity, but pay attention. Once you exit market norms and you enter the social domain, you need to pay attention to the rules of the social domain. I mean, this is important. I mean, it's very famous. Google. If you ever had the chance to visit Mountain View headquarters, it's like a theme park. I mean, sometimes there are really, I mean, the design, this is the first company that started to think about employee experience in terms of well-being and satisfaction, which means putting pillows and very nice place where to have some rest. I mean, there is the place where you can have a sleep, a short sleep. There is a scivolo, I don't know, I don't remember. I mean, from the first floor to the ground floor, you can basically use a path to slide, a slider, and there are many places where you can have food, where you can have fun. I mean, and most companies are applying that sort of context in order to be more and more attentive to the social domain. I mean, even you and I, if you think about companies that have received a directive from the Italian government a couple of years ago, now part of the production bonus that each year around May is paid to the employees, once it was only made of money, now more and more companies adopt a flexible welfare platform in which the employee can transform part of that money in things. So you get, instead of money, you get, I don't know, a coupon to pay a vacation, but also some services. I mean, you are paid your subscription to the train transport system, you are paid the kindergarten of your children, you are paid days of way off, of work off. So you can establish a social relationship between the employer and the employee. But pay attention, once you establish a social relationship between the employer and the employee, you need to be transparent on that. You need to be reliable on that, because friendship has totally different rules than what happens in a workplace. So the most amazing example comes from a very elegant experiment, very famous. You encountered that during the economics first and second level course, which is the paper, which I'm sharing again, A Fine is a Price, by Uri Gnisi and Carlo Rustichini, is quoted as a good example in the literature of experimental sciences because it applies to the context of kindergarten. So in Israel, I mean, it comes from the autobiographical experience of Uri Gnisi, that in Tel Aviv had the problem of picking up late his daughter from the kindergarten, and that produces a sense of guiltiness, and also the fact that he was pissed off, I mean, very, very disappointed, to produce disappointment on the teachers that were pissed off when he came late to pick up the girl. So he thought, why not we run an experiment in order to see if monetary incentives are going to work in order to produce change in behavior of parents. And typically they set up a very elegant experiment in which for a certain period of time, in a few bunch of kindergarten in Tel Aviv, a system of small fine has been introduced, which means that if you arrive 20 minutes late, 40 minutes late, you're going to pay $3, $6 shekel or something like that. Very small fines. I mean, the idea is that monetary sanction, fines, work in disincentivizing a behavior, picking up late your son. But the striking result of this experiment is actually, as you know, that basically parents started to come even later to pick up their sons and daughters. Why? Because you are crowding out their intrinsic motivation. So a fine is a price means that once you put a price on something, for example, the fact of picking up late your son or daughter, that becomes more and more a good, a service, for which there is a price. So you feel entitled to do that. And a very interesting insight from this paper is that once they excluded the system of fines and they got back to the system, the persistence of behavior of parents coming late was there. So moving from social to market economy in this sense actually crowded out the motivation of picking up on time your son, which has a social value independent from efficiency. So that's basically the paper I'm mentioning, but you will have the opportunity to have a look at on the Padlet, and I think you already had a look at during the course. The logic behind is that the kindergarten can hold on to my kids. I have more important things to do, and I'm entitled to come late because now I'm gonna pay for that service and good. And I mean, what you are here experiencing from a very operative example is the difference between complete contracts and incomplete contracts. In the principal agent models approach followed during the economics course, you know what we are dealing with. So complete contracts, and we are talking about market economy, is a transaction that is very clear in all its parts. If you go to the baker and you buy a baguette, you are spending €1, and for that euros, it's a sort of complete contract. You know exactly what you're going to buy and the content of that and the nature of that transaction. So you are happy enough with that. Complete contracts. Incomplete contracts, all their relationships that involve the social domain. I mean, the relationship between the employer and the employee is one good example of an incomplete contract. You pay a salary, you don't really know, and it's lucky that we are like that. I mean, you cannot control 100% of the time. I mean, for some jobs, and that is the issue of gig economy and digital platform, more and more these incomplete contracts are going towards the complete contracts, which means high efficiency in terms of the job. But what about the social value of a rider of Deliveroo? This is a big issue. And I mean, it applies to many contexts. But I mean, even in our high qualified jobs, that's an issue at stake. There is some incompleteness, and it's good that there is some incompleteness in that contract. That is important. That has to be kept. And the most relevant example of the incomplete contract, a wedding. I mean, once you marry a person, you sign sort of a contract. But of course, it's very incomplete. You are not stating everything from scratch. And I mean, that's important because it's really the typical relationship dealing with the social domain. In an effort to write complete contracts, social norms suffer if you establish from scratch, from the beginning, everything. That, of course, is a transaction, but crowds out the social value of the relationship. So complete contracts enforce the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. And again, wedding is a good example because wedding is romantic. It has a high social value that is important to keep for the couple. Let's go into explicit versus implicit norms, which is directly associated to that. I mean, think about when you call to a customer service, and since a few years ago, there may be, or for some services there is even today, the message operator standing by. And I mean, some experiments show that more and more, if you substitute that message with "if operators are busy, please call again," people are more satisfied with the possibility of having the sensation that someone else is paying attention to you 100%. And so there is not an understaffed problems, which is somehow related to what we have mentioned when dealing with the framing effect. So our language fundamentally affects how we understand the world. And that again comes from evolutionary biology. Let me show a very nice video about the color blue. Question. Remember that sometimes the field experiments are run on tribes to see if there is some innate characteristics. These are very nice studies. Okay, so language is very important, and it's very interesting the sentence, if you don't have a word for something, maybe you can see that something. That is really related to the evolutionary perspective we are talking about and using in this course. So that applies to a great example coming from the past, which is related to the fact that once you go out with your friends, hang out and drink with your friends, there is always, and there was always, the problem of who was going to be the person that was going to drive the car and therefore not supposed to drink during the evening. So who is gonna burden the cost of the evening without having fun? And of course, if nobody is really wanting to do that, the likelihood of making an accident, of having an accident, increases a lot. So there has been huge campaign in the past in order to find the perfect, or I mean the best design in order to frame the context of this guy here, of a girl, if the girl is driving, in a way that that person feels a responsibility and obligation. And I mean, advertising agency, and this is something that applies to all advertising agency, have long known that if you want to create a norm, you need to create a name. If you're gonna read the biography of Barack Obama, you will understand the nature of this sentence. If you think about the slogan, yes, you can. In politics, that is so important, because once you have a name or a very effective sentence, that of course may produce an attitude towards that sentence. And of course, that is so important for all the names of products. I mean, Apple, not surprisingly, starts with an A and with something that is highly visible. So the name that you choose for your brand is so important. And that is exactly what happened for the designated driver. I mean, there is a very nice story about how in US they started to launch social advertisement campaign about the importance of the designated driver, which is actually a concept that comes from Scandinavian countries beginning of 20th century, applied in US just in the 70s, 80s of last centuries, and there were famous people and TV series involved in order to boost the role played by the designated driver, because the designated driver is a term that enlightens the responsibility of the guy or girl that is going to drive after a social night, which of course may produce, and indeed it produced, looking at the experiment, a sort of fall in the rate of accidents because of a higher responsibility of people involved. Let's go into the last part of our video, group motivation. Of course, social pressure is there also when we do something together rather than alone. The typical example is physical exercise. We go to the gym or we attend a course together with a friend in order to be more motivated to attend that course with higher success. And more platform, this is Train Up from Kappa, company that sells clothes in Italy, that basically more and more sells social activities, social working out activities, because of course it works on group motivation. And group motivation is an issue since many times. In the Second World War, the US Army applied in most of its units the buddy system, which means that you were always coupled with a person in the army. Why that? Because think about the situation in which you fight a battle and you risk your life, and of course a friend of yours is there risking his life as well, and of course that increases your motivation to save your and the life of your friend. I mean, productivity in terms of being a soldier is there. The buddy system works on the psychological impact of something cruel and tragic like a war. And now think about your experience. That is exactly the issue of teamwork. I mean, working together enhances the collective intelligence of the group, and also the group motivation that comes from doing something together rather than alone, which is why for the projecting of the video game, we will be split in groups, working on a part of the video game and then together in order to put together the story. And that's important, of course, as well. So we are at the end of our level 4. Hope you enjoyed like I did. And next level, let's meet in a few